You're about to hear from Jennifer Morris, CEO of the Nature Conservancy. She's in her fourth year as the CEO after 2 decades at Conservation International, and she is a powerhouse. She is a woman who I've been following for a long time, given her leadership across these different realms, because she brings the business lens to conservation and to the climate movement, which is exactly what we need to make the urgent progress necessary. Buckle up. We're getting into it. I always find the Nature Conservancy to be fearless. And it's an interesting comparison because Taylor Swift kind of has the trademark on that. And TNC and Taylor Swift, similar asset numbers, $1.5, $1.6 billion in revenue that you are managing at the Nature Conservancy. And I would say fearless for the Nature Conservancy because you're willing to work with anyone. Do you find that is still true?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Katie. It's great to be here. Regarding the comparison to Taylor Swift, that's actually quite funny because I was at a big event in Hong Kong and was introduced by one of my global board members of the Taylor Swift of conservation. To my
Wow.
much embarrassment, but everyone seemed to love it. And it was quite hilarious. But yes, I would say that, like Taylor, the Nature Conservancy is fearless. I mean, we're willing to work with governments, with companies, with communities, really, because this is the biggest fight on our planet, the fight against the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis.
Well, as a perfect intro to a segment that I like to call the Trellis two-step, I'm going to say a word related to your work, and then you tell me the word that comes to mind when I say it. 2030 goals.
Ambitious, hairy, and audacious, but achievable.
Nature bonds.
So cool. Everyone should be doing it.
Namibia.
Oh, my second home. Beautiful, wonderful, challenged with increasing droughts, but an incredible place that everyone should visit.
Swimming with Atlantic salmon.
Oh, elusive and really, really, really cold.
That's fantastic. I want to ask you about all of those. I'm going to start with nature bonds because you famously said that the biggest challenge in addressing the crisis in climate and biodiversity is how to pay for it. And the work that you've been doing around green bonds is very impressive. Can you talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing there?
Absolutely. So, yeah, it's interesting. We often talk about conservation, how everyone needs to be on board with nature as part of the climate crisis. But at the end of the day, we're asking countries that are highly indebted to take their spare dollars and put it into nature conservation when, quite frankly, they're also having to pay enormous amounts of external debt. They're having to pay for school. They're having to pay for all the things that governments pay for. And so the countries that have raised their hand and said, we want to save or protect or restore 30% of their terrestrial and marine ecosystems by 2030, they're coming to the world and saying, great, how do we pay for it? And so I think nature bonds is a great example where we're moving from conversation about conservation to real money. And that's when we see change happening. I often give the example, Katie, that when I go to a country and I want to meet with an official and talk about nature, I often get relegated to talking to the environment minister who's doing really great things. But we know in most countries, the environment minister doesn't have the power of the agricultural minister, doesn't have the power of the infrastructure minister, and certainly does not have the power of the president or the prime minister. So now when I come talking about nature bonds, I have a very different conversation in countries, or my team has a very different conversation in countries. And this has really been transformational for the countries we've done this. And we've started this in 2016 through the amazing leadership of the government of the Seychelles, and have since done several other countries, and we have more to come. Together, it's not just us doing this either, Katie. What's so exciting is that now organizations like the Pew Charitable Trust are doing this, and we're now starting a coalition to get others to do it. Well, we've seen billions of dollars in debt that's been restructured, and we've unlocked over $500 million from the private sector that's now going into conservation for the first time. And really, I've been doing conservation finance work for over 20 years. And I can tell you, nature bonds is the first time that I've seen real investment at scale. And we're seeing more and more opportunities to scale this around the world. So it is super exciting. And again, we hope everyone will start doing nature bonds.
Well, you've heard it here. This is a call for stealing liberally from the Nature Conservancy's work around green bonds. So we've got COP16 happening, COP29, the climate gathering coming up. What is the Nature Conservancy's plan for bridging those two COP gatherings?
The last climate COP really continued the momentum of having nature being more, I wouldn't say at the center, but more part of the conversation than historically. And it's clear from all of us in this space that nature continues to represent at least 30% of the solution for the climate crisis. So that's everything from making sure existing tropical forests and critical mangrove and peat swamps don't get further transformed. It's making sure that we restore what we've lost and really making sure that we're sustainably financing all of those things at the same time. And that is a way that we've seen when these conversations, the momentum from so many groups out there who recognize the centrality of nature to the climate crisis. It's not just about renewable energy. In fact, if we all went net zero tomorrow, we did nothing on land use change, we wouldn't even come close to hitting the targets under the Paris Climate Accord. So it's essential that we continue to bridge these. At the same time, we had kind of a Paris moment in December 2022 with the Kunming Montreal Protocol under the Global Biodiversity Framework, which really helped countries again to set forth things like the 30% protection by 2030. These are hairy and audacious, but we have to figure out a way to pay for them. And so that's why at the next COP, we're of course really thinking about all the COPs to come. Quite frankly, we're now in the age of implementation of these great frameworks. We have the goals. Now, how do we make sure that they're at the local level, at the national level, at the subnational level? How do we make sure that governments have the financial and the technical resources to implement these broad goals? It has to go, again, it has to be mainstreamed from outside just the environmental movement and really inside the finance ministers, the agricultural ministers. The more we can mainstream nature and climate together when we think about economies and people's well-being, the more chance we'll have of stemming the worst consequences of climate change and biodiversity loss. Because at the end of the day, the rules are really important. And I can't stress this enough. We have seen fantastic action, again, voluntary action on behalf of many companies and many countries. But at the end of the day, to really make a difference on what is systemic transformation, we can't leave any country out, and we can't allow one company to do a good thing while another one is not, because of course they're going to get a pricing advantage that the company that's doing the good thing is doing. So that's where we have to see real change, is much more at a systems level. And that's something that Nature Conservancy and many of our partners are really focused on now.
Let's say it's after both of these COPs have happened and you open your inbox and there's the email that you have been waiting for. Who is it from? What is the subject line?
Oh, I love that question. There's a message from Xi Jinping that says the Chinese government will no longer buy agricultural products that have come from lands that have been deforested. That for me would be amazing. And I say that specifically because we're seeing much more efforts on behalf of non-Chinese companies to really try to address and understand what's happening in their supply chain and try to stop it in places like the state of Pará in Brazil, where we're deeply engaged with Governor Helder and many of the supply chain actors there to really figure out to make sure there's full transparency in the cattle supply chain, and to make sure that none of the cows that are grown in the state of Pará are coming from deforested lands. Very complex problem, but if we don't have China on board and at a policy level, at a national level, saying we commit to this, I am quite afraid that we will not see that systemic change that we need to see in cutting down the Amazon, which is quite frankly at a tipping point.
Well, we will make sure that they have your email address.
Great.
Make sure it happens. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Maybe the last question I might ask is, can you name something that you have read or a person you have talked to that really changed the way that you think?
I'm reading Tom Steyer's new book right now, Cheaper, Faster, Better. And I will say that it is, first of all, I'm listening to it on audio, on Audible, and highly recommend listening to it. What he's saying is basically this whole concept of a green premium, of that we have to pay more for food, we have to pay more for energy, we have to pay more for sustainable, is not ever going to work, and is nice, but to really scale, we have to make cars running from renewable energy that are less expensive, and quite frankly are better cars. I think we have to do the same when we think about agriculture. We often talk in agricultural space, well, people just need to pay more for food. I fundamentally don't think that that will scale. I mean, if you look at the organic market, it has done great things. People pay more, but it hasn't scaled, I think, the way we all wanted it to scale. So I firmly believe this is kind of shaping a lot of my thinking around a lot of the crises right now is how do we make sure that everything we're building can compete in the market and not create an alternative market, which maybe will address part of the problem, but not really be holistic.
It's so interesting. So thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
coming.
much, Katie. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.